Hi everyone, this is Heather. This is episode 528, and I honestly cannot believe that we have not discussed this sooner. I feel like I've been a little bit negligent because I have been shooting with the Profoto A1. I've had it for a few years, and I picked up the Godox V1 at YM Camera when they were very first released, which was, oh my goodness, has that even been a year? I'm not sure. I'd have to look it up. And by the way, you should purchase all of your gear at YM Camera. Whether you are local or not, they can ship online, and they are nice enough to let me play with this gear and test it so that I can bring you better reviews. So I have definitely shot longer with the A1 than I have the V1, but I wanted to talk about some of the differences so that you can make an informed decision when you are doing this comparison, because the Profoto A1 comes in at just under $1,000, $995, and the Godox V1 is $259. So almost, not quite, almost a quarter of the price. So what really the question is it worth the price to spend more on the Profoto A1? So a couple of things. First, I would look at power output. How do these compare? Well, the power output is nearly identical. And there's two things important to note here. Number one, I'm an engineer by trade, so I love data and I love numbers. So I look at all the comparison charts, and if you want to get really specific, you can search YouTube videos. There are a ton of them out there on how these perform against one another. This video is just meant to be a summary of that information and my personal use case scenario, how I test these. Okay, so number one, I love data. I like to look at the charts. I like to look at the numbers. That's the engineer in me. But number two, and maybe even more importantly, I am more interested in how this actually performs when I'm photographing. And for me, that's at a wedding. So I have used both of these in portrait sessions as off-camera and on-camera light, and I have used them both the same way at wedding receptions, actually all day at weddings. So the number one thing that's important to me as a wedding photographer is battery life. So these both run on rechargeable batteries, and they both lasted an entire wedding. However, I will say that the Godox battery had a longer life than the Profoto. It seems to drain much faster when in standby mode than just like the actual firing of it. So in terms of battery life, Godox is better, and that's really, really important to me. Now, if you're a wedding photographer and you're shooting with one of these, I'm going to recommend that you have multiple batteries because you'll definitely want to have a backup. I did not have a backup battery at the weddings I was shooting. I had backup flashes because I didn't want to buy a second battery for this. They're probably not even that expensive, to be honest, but I didn't want to. Okay, ease of use. If you look at the controls and what they look like, they're both really easy to use. Now, Profoto's claim was, it's very simple. You just press a button and turn it on. And that is true. You do just press a button and, oh, look at this. Look at this. It's dead. Isn't that interesting? Because I haven't used it in a while, which means it hasn't been charged. That's fair. But it's been sitting with the rest of my camera gear and the battery's dead. Oh, I wonder about the V1. Let's see. Interesting. Fired right up. Well, there you go. That just proves it. Not that that's a conclusive test, but trust me, the tests have been run and I have witnessed it myself. The Godox V1 battery life outperforms the A1. That's just the way it is. Light patterns are nearly identical. Obviously, they're coming out of these circular heads. There are a ton of videos on YouTube where they have fired them into a black wall so that they could see the light pattern. And it looks like in most of the photos that I saw, the Godox has a more even light pattern to it. It's just more pleasing. And the A1 did not. So in terms of light patterns, I don't know how noticeable that would be when you're photographing. I mean, I never noticed that, but if you look at it shot against the wall, the pattern on the V1 looks a little bit nicer. The color on the V1 is a little bit cooler. So outdoor is around 5,500 Kelvin. This was coming in from some data that I read, like in the 5,700 range, and this was coming more in the like 6,500 range, so it has a little bit more blue to it. If you're shooting outside, I mean, you could use that. You could gel it. They take the same modifiers. So you see how they have this round head. It's also magnetic. So with the Profoto A1, I have this modifier. understanding that while Profoto, and listen, I bought into it for sure. They were saying this is the world's smallest studio light because it had more power than a speed light. But the truth is, the output of the light in terms of its size is still really small without a modifier. It's small and it's direct, which makes it a speed light. You modify it like this, it looks a little bit better because it's softened. So I wondered, it's magnetic, that's nice. They have the same modifiers. They have this, they have grids, they have gels, etc. But I was wondering, would the Profoto A1 modifier fit the V1? Oh, look at that. Sure does. So I don't even need to buy the modifier because this one works and I have modifiers for the A1. So there you go. I also figured out recently, I had my mag mod and I did not have the adapter with me, but I figured out that I could stretch the mag sphere and actually put it on the V1. It's hard to do it on camera, meaning I usually need to balance it. I could put this on my V1 without the adapter. It was, well, okay, if you wanted to make sure it stayed, then you should probably put the adapter on, but I could do that if I wanted to. So again, the light source is still small. It's modified a little bit, so it's a little bit softer. I didn't notice any difference or any trouble with recycle times. That's also really important to me. I photographed fast moving wedding dancing reception, and I think the recycle times came in almost identical. I think the data says it's like a second and a half, but I would love to do a test right here where I turn the Profoto A1 on and do it with the Godox, but the A1 won't turn on because it wasn't charged. Okay, it was sitting in my drawer, but the V1 turned on. This battery life on this just doesn't seem awesome. I'm looking at my notes because I wrote down some things. So if the recycle time is nearly identical, the light pattern is better here. They register the same output in terms of power. All of the technical specs are very, very similar. Okay, if that's the case, would you, like I'm asking you for real to post a comment, would you spend $1,000 on a Profoto A1 versus the Godox V1 at $259? Would you do that? Because I gotta be honest with you, unless you have the Profoto ecosystem, to spend 4 times the amount on this versus this would be stupid. I would say that maybe you had more money than sense if you did that. But listen, if you like Profoto, again, if you're in their ecosystem and you need them to communicate with one another, I honestly believe that's the only reason I could justify this expense. Because here's the thing. If all of the tech specs, are nearly identical, then what's the only way you can compare these two? Okay, by the way, there's a business lesson here. There's a business lesson here for photographers and pricing. Pay attention. If the specs are identical, there's only one way to compare them, and that's based on price. When there is only one way to compare 2 different objects and its price, it becomes a commodity. And most consumers will go for the less expensive version, because why would you do that? Again, if the specs are the same and there's no other way to compare it, you're going to look at the price. If it becomes a commodity, most consumers will shop based on the cheapest price because everything else looks identical. And I know a lot of us, Becky is watching and she's here, dropped $1,000 on this light when it came out because it was all the rage. And I mean, hey, listen, you got to give it to Profoto for doing that. They were ahead of Godox by, I don't know the timetable, but it was at least a year, maybe 2. And then Godox came out with this and Profoto was upset, understandably so, because they knew that once those specs were the same, it would become a commodity. People would compare based on price because, and actually the tech specs, while the same, the data, this battery life works better. I like this better because I like the battery life. This battery life, it's good. Don't mishear me. But if I have one that works better, this was just sucking battery even on standby mode. So the only reason I personally think you would purchase the A1 is if you were in the, if you were in the Profoto ecosystem. If you are new to photography and you you're not loyal to any one brand, then I would absolutely go with the Godox. It just doesn't make sense. Okay. That being said, that begs the next question, which is, because I think we've answered that. I've had a lot of people ask me if they should buy the A1 or the V1. Listen, you have to make your own decisions. If you want to spend 4 times the amount of money, then you may do so, but I don't know why you would. I can't see why you would do that. The next question then becomes, especially if you don't have one, is should you pick up the V1 or the V862? So the only difference really here is the shape, and their power output is nearly identical. I would say, what would be the determining factor? This is $179, I believe. This is $259. Power output is nearly identical. If I were a photographer that liked to photograph with off-camera lighting, I think I would buy this. Oh, who am I kidding? I have both. I want both. You could use 2 of these. You could use one of these, whatever you want. I like the way Godox talks to one another. It's very simple and easy to use. I think this is a little bit easier to set up as a master when you're working with some slaves. So I have put this off camera with just a trigger. I have put this on and off camera with this on or off camera. I've done various different tests, and I personally, it was easiest for me to set this up as a master. It was less clicks of the button than trying to get through the menus with this. It was just a little bit easier, but the light difference, it comes out differently. The quality is a little bit different, but if you look at the tests, I mean, they're both speed lights. It's both close light. It's going to be harsh until or unless you modify it. And it depends on the modifier you're using. If you use something like this on here, I don't have the adapter on this V862. It's on my other one. And this on here, well, I think this quality of light is going to be ever so slightly better because this is a bigger diffuser. There's just more space there. So $179, $259. I like this. It feels a little higher end, if that's possible in a flash, than this. But I love these V862s. For $179, I don't think you can beat the price. I have had a lot of luck in the Godox ecosystem, just talking to one another, setting up various scenarios with multiple lights and slaves, and I just like it. I think it's really easy to use once you get the hang of it. And when you're in the same ecosystem, obviously, it becomes easier because you're accustomed to the menus. So, if you are in the market and you just want to flash for on your camera, then you should probably pick up a V862. If you're in the market and you're doing weddings or you want to do off-camera lighting and you want to get a little bit more sophisticated with it, then pick up one of each, or you could pick up this one now and this one later. It depends on what you shoot. It depends on your needs. And of course, it depends on your budget. But if you have, oh my gosh, somebody do this math for me. 180 plus 260. I mean, you're looking at like 420. Do I have that right? Okay. Anyway, under $500 to get both of these. When, if you look at the higher end Nikon and Canon flashes, they're sitting around $500 or $600. This is sub $500 for both of these instead of one of those, or $1,000 A1. I mean, I think you can do the math there. It depends on how much you want to spend. I am very happy with Godox. I'm very happy with this system. I've never had any issues. And when I go to pick up, if I want what I perceive to be a nicer light, it's the same. I pick up the V1 over the A1. I haven't even used this lately, which is why the battery is dead. I'm sorry about that, Profoto, but you just became a commodity. Now, the business lesson here is if somebody is searching for a photographer and your work looks similar and they get the same vibe from you, everything is sort of equal, the only way they can compare you is based on price. I never, ever want my business to be in a position where people are comparing me based on price. I want it to be so obvious that there is a higher level of value through experience in addition to the photos, that it separates me out of the commodity lane. I will say, there is no problem staying in the commodity lane where most people swim. I used two different analogies there because I was thinking fish and pond, but I was also thinking highway. You can stay in the commodity lane. I don't have a problem with that, but people are going to compare you based on price. I wanted to step out of the commodity lane and take a different approach to it. I didn't want to be compared based on price, obviously, because I knew I would lose. I was way, way more expensive than my competition, and I did it quite successfully for many years. So it is possible, but you have to differentiate yourself. I think where we kind of went wrong here, I don't work for Profoto, I don't work for Godox, I don't work for anyone, is that the V1 was so comparable to the A1 that there was no way to differentiate. There was no way to say, oh, well, the A1 has this, so it's absolutely worth it. And because of that, I'm guessing that the sales on the A1 have gone down. Now, there are photographers who work in sophisticated studio setups who shoot Profoto lights and bought the A1 because they talk nicely to one another. That makes sense. Becky says I can get the whole Godox setup at the same price as the trigger I need for the Profoto, basically. So hopefully this helps you make a better decision. If it were me, I would go with Godox. And if I were starting out, ideally, I'd pick up one of each, but you start where you start and you practice and you learn, and then you can get more sophisticated in your setups. I hope that you found this useful. I'll see you in the next video.